Okay, now we're going to talk about a macromolecule, protein. Protein is the macromolecule that gives us structure. So you're going to find that in eggs, in meat, in peanut butter, in milk, and lots of different sources. So the structure of protein, if we're thinking about proteins, we'll start with the subunits. So the subunits of a protein, which is the monomer. So the monomer of a protein is an amino acid. There are only 20 amino acids total. But like our alphabet, there's 26 letters. We can arrange those in all different sequences. And so when we arrange the 20 amino acids in different sequences, for example, we have methionine, serine, leucine, lysine, arginine. In that sequence, it tells us something very different, kind of like a word when we arrange letters in order to create words. The average protein has about 100 amino acids. I actually think that's probably a little bit on the short side. I think some proteins are way more than 100 amino acids, but on average, it's probably about 100. Now, unlike carbohydrates and lipids, proteins have additional elements. And so, like in the carbohydrates and the lipids, there's carbon because it's organic. There is hydrogen. There is oxygen. But in addition, the protein molecule also will have nitrogen. And so nitrogen is going to be that new element that you're going to find in pretty much all proteins. In addition, there will occasionally, you're going to find some sulfur. We don't usually put sulfur up there when we're talking about it, but there can be sulfur also in proteins. When amino acids bond together, so for example, you have a methionine and it's going to bond to a serine. Remember that bond, you have to release water, so it is dehydration synthesis. But this bond is actually going to be called a peptide bond this time. And when we link amino acids together using peptide bonds, we now call them not polyamino acids, but we call them poly. So remember, poly is many peptides. So a big long chain of amino acids. So I have an amino acid connected to another one. And remember, on average, this would be like 100 of them. This is a polypeptide, meaning many amino acids bonded together. Once this is all in a chain, it then folds on itself, kind of like this structure right here, which would be an actual protein. Proteins have some important functions for us. Number one, they give us structure. So if you think of yourself, here you are. You have some big biceps, you have some big quadriceps, you have some great calves, maybe you have really curly hair. All of these characteristics are because of proteins. Maybe because of how your eyes are set, they look different, or the shape of your lips. Those are all determined based on the structural proteins that you actually have. Collagen, for example, forms your cartilage and your tendons. These is your connective tissue. Keratin is going to help form hair. And so everything that we are, our structure, really depends on proteins. That's the main function of proteins. In addition, there is a functional piece. And this one we're going to spend some time on later in this week. We're going to actually do a lab. Functional proteins are known as enzymes. And we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about enzymes because enzymes are what allow us to get a job done. Enzymes are what allow us to actually make chemical reactions happen and allow our body to function, allow the chemical reactions to function and for things to happen. When we break down food, that's really because of enzymes that we have. When we transport blood or transport oxygen, hemoglobin is a protein that transports oxygen. And so enzymes are pretty amazing things. You're going to find that the end of an enzyme, the suffix of an enzyme usually ends in ase. So, for example, we have the sugar lactose, and the enzyme lactase is what breaks down the sugar lactose. So if you're lactose intolerant, it's because you don't actually make the protein lactase, so you can't break it down. Enzymes catalyze, or they act as catalysts. So what that means is they are going to speed up chemical reactions. So they're going to speed up chemical reactions and allow chemical reactions that normally wouldn't happen very quickly. It's going to allow them to happen very fast so we can sustain life. So enzymes are really important, and we're going to learn more about those and how different things can actually inhibit or encourage enzyme activity. Some of the examples where we're going to get protein. Your primary, if you're a meat eater, you're going to get a ton of protein out of eating meat. You can get protein out of vegetable or non-meat sources as well. It just means you're going to probably need a little bit more of those, maybe focus more on like the nuts, the legumes, things like that in order to actually get protein in your diet. And the final group of macromolecules are the nucleic acids. Nucleic acids, there's two primary nucleic acids. There is DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, and RNA, ribonucleic acid. And ribonucleic acid basically takes information from DNA and takes it out into the cell and uses it because we want to protect our DNA. We don't want to damage our DNA, and so we make copies of it. So RNA is basically a copy of DNA that can go out into the cell and actually make whatever the DNA says. For example, typically it's going to make a protein. The function of nucleic acid is to store and to transfer genetic information. So here's information. This genetic information in particular, it is the information that tells us how to make those proteins. So for example, if you can't make the protein lactase, okay, remember that's an enzyme, but it's a protein. If you can't make that, it's because your DNA, there's a mistake in your DNA. And you don't have the ability to make lactase. So if you can't make lactase, then you're not going to be able to eat things like ice cream. Those are going to be off limits because if you eat ice cream, it's going to make you pretty sick. The instructions for how to make that enzyme is written in your nucleic acid. Elements in nucleic acid, again, you have carbon, we have hydrogen, we have oxygen, we have nitrogen, just like in the protein, but we're going to add one more, and that's going to be the P, because in DNA you have phosphorus. DNA is actually made up of a monomer, so the monomer of nucleic acid is known as a nucleotide. And the nucleotide is going to have a phosphate in it. If we take a look here at the structure of DNA, right here you see a nucleotide. And so in this nucleotide you have a sugar. If it's DNA, it's deoxyribose. If it's RNA, it's just ribose. You have a phosphate. That's where the phosphorus comes in. And then you have a nitrogen base. And those three little pieces fit together in a very specific pattern, and they form what is known as a nucleotide. nucleotide. And nucleotides then come together. Here's one, here's another one, here's one on this side. And as they form together, they are the building blocks of DNA. And so the language of DNA actually is pretty simple because there are only adenine, that's one letter. So we have A's, we have guanine, that's G's, we have cytosine, C's, and thymine, T's. Now, thymine can't be an RNA, and so it changes into uracil, U. But really, there are only 4 letters, and so you can think of writing, we could have A. That means something very different than ATA, or ACC, or GGT. All of those things mean something very different, just like if we were going to write the fat cat sat, like words with just 3 letters. And so DNA is actually a code. It's a secret code. It tells us how to make the proteins that we need in order to function. Examples of nucleic acid are DNA, which is double-stranded, and it is found inside the nucleus, so it's in the nucleus. And then you have RNA, and there are 3 specific types of RNA, and they all have very different jobs, but they get their information from the DNA. So DNA is the big code, it's the blueprint of life, and then we take that and we make a message of it, we make this decoder, and then we make this transfer RNAs in order to carry out and actually read and transcribe the information on the DNA. Structural examples of nucleic acids. So right here in the middle, this is the monomer. This is a nucleotide. It's the monomer of DNA, which is right here. This is DNA. This is a transfer RNA. Again, this is DNA. How do I know that? Because there's 1 strand, 2 strands. It's a 2-strand. And this one is messenger RNA. And so these are the only examples. We don't look at this when we look at food. We don't count the amount of nucleic acid we get from food. We get nucleic acid from every living thing we eat because all living things they contain DNA. And so we get DNA from the living things we eat. We break it down into the basic nucleotides, and then we build it back up into our own nucleotides that instruct how to make the masterpiece U. So that wraps it up for our macromolecules.